I'm trying to understand who lied to women. Corporate America has destroyed the relationships between men and women, and they have left our American women bitter, unhappy, unwed, with an enormous amount of debt. And they are no good to anybody but themselves. Not because they're bad people, because they were manipulated by corporations. The corporations wanted cheap labor. The more women that flooded into the job market, the lower the value of each job. Because if more, it's supply and demand. If there's more workers, then there is less incentive for higher pay because you could just pay, you could pay, you could pay less. And historically, every time women enter an industry, that industry, the pay rate goes down. That's historically. There is only 10% of available wealth to all Americans that are not a part of the 1 or 9%. So there's not more wealth to go around. So as more women enter the workforce, the value of work goes down. If you combine that with inflation, then you have a terrible situation. What am I saying specifically? I'm telling you that according to the Census Bureau, it said that in 1960, specifically, the educational level of the population of the United States continued its steady increase during the decade of the 50s. In 1960, the median number of years formal schooling adults 25 and older was 10 years as compared to 9.3 of the population of 1950. What does that mean? That means that the percentage of adults who had completed high school rose from 30 to 41%, meaning that in 1950, most adults, less than half adults even finished high school. And there were plenty of wealthy people. There were plenty of people who had businesses that were doing well. Let's take it a step further. Let's take it a little bit further. It says that the percentage of people who had completed 4 years or more of college went from 6 to 8%. What does that mean? That means in 1950, only 6% of adults had completed a 4-year degree. There were plenty of wealthy people. So if only 4% of American people completed a 4-year degree in 1950, that's kind of the proof that education isn't the vehicle for wealth. That is kind of what that's saying. Oh, okay. So in 1960, only 8% of all Americans had completed a 4 years of school or more. But for some reason, corporations and Cosmo told women that they weren't doing well because they didn't have education. Why would they need education when there was plenty of wealth in America? There was plenty of wealth to go around, and only 8% of Americans by 1960 had a degree. Why is that a problem? Because they broke up families so they could lower the value of work. Now they have left our women with excruciating debt. And now we have all of these people with degrees that don't have work. Why? Because in 1960, only 8% of all Americans had 4-year degrees. But for some reason, Americans were tricked into thinking that the only way they could be successful or fight their way out of poverty is to go to school. Now we have people that have degrees and have debt. Let me tell you something. In 1950, in 1960, the people were better off because if you didn't have an education and you had a job and no debt, you were better off than having a master's degree with debt up to your eyeballs and a job that doesn't cover the debt. Our women have been tricked, manipulated. Our women were marketed debt. They stole our wives. Corporate America stole American men's wives. They put our women in work and stressed our women out. They stripped them of femininity, and they lied to them and told them that they were struggling because men are misogynists and that men put them in the kitchen. Men did not put women in the kitchen because those same men that were labeled misogynists, they had to survive a draft in order to be a husband. No woman has ever been subjected to a draft, and the men that are labeled misogynists were subjugated to war and to the draft. The draft didn't end to 1973. The draft didn't end to 1973, meaning that many men were also subjugated by the government. But for some reason, the men of America are blamed for the government subjugating women to domestic work? Why are male civilians paying a penalty for corporate America and the government making policies? No men ever had the power to put in women in the kitchen. The government created that, just like the government created a system to where men had to go fight to war. And if you survived the war, you were lucky enough to get a wife.